Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really intriguing and often pretty misunderstood topic.
hmm
How does a nation like Israel, just 9 million people, become such a constant fixture in global headlines? And you hear this term powerhouse status, especially in the US and Europe.
It's a fascinating question, and it definitely sparks a lot of debate. Lots of claims, counterclaims, some quite heated, quite controversial.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Mm.
Our mission, really, is to help you understand how influence actually works in practice.
Yeah, separating the facts from, let's say, the more charged narratives, we want to look at the mechanisms, what our sources actually show.
And we're aiming to be really impartial here, just reporting on the documentary evidence, the expert views in the source material we've gathered.
Right, we're not taking sides, just laying out what the evidence suggests about how things operate.
So to kick things off, let's be super clear on terms. When we say influence, what are we actually talking about?
Good point. We mean verifiable things. Lobbying, diplomacy, cultural connections, economic ties, that sort of thing.
And crucially, we are not talking about control. That word often gets thrown around in unfounded conspiracy theories.
Exactly. Like there's really harmful anti-Semitic tropes about, Jews controlling the world.
Our sources, including experts from groups like the ADL, explicitly debunk those ideas. So, just to reiterate, we're focused purely on verifiable influence mechanisms.
Precisely. So what are we going to unpack? We'll look at how lobbying works, say, in the US and Europe.
What tools are used? How does it stack up against what other countries do?
Yeah, and we've got quite a stack of sources. Declassified US State Department documents, EU trade deals, books like The Israel Lobby by Mershamer and Walt.
All sorts of things to help us and you navigate this really complex area.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe the US. That's often where the discussion is loudest.
Sounds good. And when you talk about influence in Washington, D.C., lobbying power inevitably comes up. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee,
Yeah.
it's always central to that conversation.
Right. And the numbers are pretty staggering. Our sources estimate its annual budget is around, what, $100 million?
Yeah, a huge figure. But it's not just the money, is it? It's their ability to get bipartisan support. Democrats, Republicans.
Hmm.
They have reach across the aisle in Congress.
That's a key takeaway from the sources, and you can see how that translates into real results. For example, AIPAC's documented role in securing that massive $3.8 billion a year in U.S. military aid for Israel.
That's a concrete outcome.
Definitely. But, it's not just AIPAC operating in this space.
Right, you mentioned other groups.
Yeah, like Christians United for Israel, CUFI. They bring millions of evangelical supporters into the mix. That broadens the base way beyond just Jewish groups or typical lobbying efforts.
So it's a combination of deep pockets and grassroots mobilization.
Exactly. It's sophisticated. Financial power plus getting people energized plus targeting legislation strategically. It's a very effective model.
And we see concrete examples, right, like congressional resolutions supporting Israel. Those often pass with overwhelming majorities, especially after events like the 2014 Gaza conflict.
Yeah, and sources like the Lobby USA documentary, plus public records like financial disclosures from Open Secrets, and just looking at congressional votes, they all piece together how these groups operate.
It paints a picture of real effectiveness.
It does, but what's also important, and our sources really try to balance this, is including different voices. You hear from former AIPAC staff, some members of Congress who are critical political scientists.
And what do they collectively suggest?
That while AIPAC is undeniably powerful, it's not absolute or unchallenged. It operates in a dynamic political field where there's pushback and debate.
Okay, so that's the direct lobbying angle.
Yeah.
But influence isn't just about laws and budgets, right?
Right.
What about shaping the narrative, public perception?
Ah, yes. Media influence, that's another huge dimension.
There's that documentary, The Occupation of the American Mind. It argues pretty strongly that Israel uses sophisticated PR to shape how U.S. media covers things.
It does make that case, and it points to specific tactics. For instance, Frank Luntz's Global Language Dictionary.
What's that?
It's basically a guide for pro-Israel advocates on what words to use, like consistently framing actions as self-defense.
Language matters.
Hugely. It's about using cognitive linguistics, essentially, to shape how people perceive events. Subtle shifts in wording can really change public sympathy, especially in complex conflicts.
That's fascinating. But is this unique to Israel? I mean, don't lots of groups try to spin the media,
That's a really crucial counterpoint, and the sources do highlight this. If you analyze major U.S. news outlets, say CNN or Fox News, during conflicts,
Yeah.
you often see that corporate media tends to align with the broader U.S. government narrative anyway. It might be a more general media phenomenon, not something solely specific to Israel's efforts.
So it's part of a bigger picture of how media often works, especially corporate media.
Exactly. And again, to get the full picture, the sources bring in media watchdogs, critical journalists, PR experts.
Mhm.
They all add layers. It shows that, yes, specific tactics exist, but the media environment itself is incredibly complex.
Got it. So lobbying, media,
Yeah.
what about direct political funding and pressure? Campaign money.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely part of the equation. Campaign contributions are significant. You have major pro-Israel donors, people like the late Sheldon Adelson or Haim Sabin. Their contributions are substantial and, of course, public record via the FEC.
And does that money translate into direct pressure?
Well, the sources suggest a connection. It's not just about the donations themselves, but the access and potentially the pressure that comes with being a major donor or having a powerful PACs supporting or opposing you.
Is there evidence of politicians facing backlash?
Yes. A very clear case study is Representative Ilhan Omar. Her comments critical of Israel in 2019 sparked a huge backlash. It shows the kind of intense pressure politicians can face if they step outside certain lines.
You sometimes see pretty extreme allegations online, things like blackmail. Do the sources back that up?
That's where it gets tricky. Social media throws around heavy terms, but the source material we reviewed consistently emphasizes a lack of concrete evidence for those really extreme claims like blackmail.
But they do acknowledge the pressure is real.
Absolutely. Intense political pressure exists, definitely. But it seems to operate more through established channels, funding, lobbying, public criticism, rather than cloak and dagger stuff, based on the available evidence.
And how does this compare? Is this level of activity unusual in U.S. politics?
That's maybe the most important perspective check. When you look at the methods, big money, focused lobbying, PR campaigns, grassroots efforts, it's actually quite similar to what other powerful lobbies do. Think about the NRA, or even lobbying by countries like Saudi Arabia. Significant, well-funded advocacy is just, well, it's a major feature of the American political system.
So, while effective, the methods aren't necessarily unique to the pro-Israel lobby.
Pretty much. And hearing from campaign finance experts or politicians who've been on the receiving end really underscores the scale and coordination involved. It's a powerful example of modern political influence.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's cross the Atlantic. What does Israel's influence look like in Europe?
It's a different landscape, but still significant. Diplomatic ties are key. Germany is a huge one. That relationship is deeply shaped by history, Holocaust reparations, of course, but also modern factors like significant German arms exports to Israel.
And the UK.
Also very strong ties going way back to the Balfour Declaration. It's a long, complex history there, too.
What about economically?
That's critical. The EU-Israel Association Agreement from 2000 gives Israel preferential trade status. That's a massive economic link tying Israel closely to the entire EU bloc.
So deep historical roots and strong economic incentives.
Exactly, and you see it reflected in political stances. Germany's pledge of unwavering support after October 7th, 2023, that wasn't just a statement out of the blue. It reflects decades of policy and connection.
And the sources here, EU trade data? Arms export figures?
Yeah, official statements, data from places like CPR or Eurostat, but also perspectives from EU diplomats, German historians talking about the impact of Holocaust guilt, and BDS activists discussing the resistance they encounter in Europe. It gives you that fuller picture.
You mentioned BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. How does Israel engage with that in Europe?
Oh, very actively. Countering BDS and managing criticism is a big part of the strategy in Europe. Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, for example, ran campaigns specifically targeting BDS. Things like funding groups, including some based in the U.S., like the Israel on Campus Coalition, to push back against BDS initiatives. The goal is pretty clear: to frame BDS as illegitimate and minimize its impact.
Are there legal measures involved too?
Yes, sometimes. We've seen European laws or resolutions condemning or even trying to ban BDS. Germany's 2019 resolution calling BDS anti-Semitic is a prominent example.
And what about those allegations of surveillance, like in the Lobby USA documentary?
Right. That documentary included footage suggesting Israeli embassy staff might be gathering intelligence on activists. These kinds of allegations point to a more covert side of efforts to manage criticism.
But is Israel's influence totally dominant in Europe? Or is there more pushback than, say, in the U.S.?
That's a really important counterpoint. There is significant European criticism of Israel, arguably more visible sometimes than in the U.S.
Like what?
Think about UN votes, where many European countries vote against Israeli positions, or ongoing investigations by the International Criminal Court, the ICC. European countries aren't monolithic in their approach.
So it's not an unchallenged landscape.
Definitely not. While the influence mechanisms are there, diplomacy, economics, countering BDS, there are also clear limits. There are pockets of strong resistance, differing national policies, and actions that definitely don't align with Israeli preferences.
And the sources backing this up include things like leaked documents, parliamentary records.
Exactly. Leaked docs from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs published by outlets like the Electronic Intifada, parliamentary debates, insights from documentaries like Israelism, plus voices from European BDS organizers and international law experts on the ICC probes. It shows a much more contested environment.
Okay, so we've looked at the U.S., Europe. What about the bigger global picture? How far does this influence reach, and what are its limits overall?
Beyond the West, Israel definitely has global reach. Its tech sector is a major factor. Cybersecurity, for instance, NSO Group and its Pegasus spyware, that's Israeli tech with global impact and controversy.
And arms exports too, right?
Big time. Israel is a major global arms exporter that creates strategic ties and dependencies with countries all over the world.
What about soft power? Things beyond tech and weapons.
Yeah, that's part of it too. Cultural exchanges, the Birthright Israel program bringing young Jewish people to visit, and Hasbara, which is essentially Israel's public diplomacy effort.
Hasbara. Can you give an example?
Sure. It might involve funding campaigns on university campuses internationally, or providing materials and talking points to diplomats and spokespeople to shape media narratives abroad, trying to present Israel's case on complex issues.
And then there's the UN.
Right. Israel's position at the UN is often bolstered significantly by the United States, particularly through U.S. vetoes of Security Council resolutions critical of Israel. That's a very specific but powerful form of global diplomatic support.
But again, there's pushback, a counter-narrative.
Absolutely, and it feels like it's growing. Israel faces really significant global criticism. Look at the ICJ genocide case brought by South Africa, or the huge controversies around funding for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees.
So influential, but also facing major international challenges.
Precisely. Sources like arms export data, cybersecurity reports from places like Citizen Lab on NSO, UN voting records, they all paint this complex picture. Influential, yes. Universally supported, definitely not.
And hearing from tech analysts, UN diplomats, activists in the global south, they all offer different views on these challenges.
Which leads us to the crucial question, what are the real limits to this influence? Where does it bump up against constraints?
Well, one obvious point seems to be the reliance on the U.S.
Huge point. That $3.8 billion in annual U.S. aid we mentioned, it's not just helpful, it represents a fundamental dependency. It gives the U.S. significant leverage and limits Israel's autonomy in some ways, even while providing massive benefits.
And what about Europe? Are things changing there?
It seems so. We're seeing growing criticism, actions like Ireland recognizing Palestine in 2024, that indicates dynamics are shifting, even among generally friendly nations.
And public opinion, particularly among younger people.
That's another major factor. Pew Research polls, especially the 2024 data, show declining support for Israel among younger Americans. That's a potential long-term shift that could really impact future U.S. policy. Generational change is real.
So how does Israel's influence compare overall, say, to China or Saudi Arabia?
It's useful context. Other nations also wield significant global power, often through different means. China through massive economic investment, Saudi Arabia through oil and religious influence. Israel's toolkit tech, lobbying, strategic alliances, U.S. backing is potent, but it's one form of influence among many on the world stage.
Understanding Israel's methods helps us see patterns elsewhere, too.
Exactly. It's about recognizing how nations try to shape the international environment. And the sources, like the polling data, EU policy shifts, documentaries like Israelism, looking at young Jewish Americans questioning Zionism, they all highlight these limits.
Plus insights from pollsters and geopolitical strategists.
Right. They analyze these vulnerabilities and shifting dynamics. It shows that even for a very influential nation, there are always constraints and counterpressures.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. After this deep dive, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think it's clear Israel does exert significant influence. The mechanisms are verifiable lobbying, media strategies, diplomacy. especially potent in the US and parts of Europe.
Right. But, and this feels crucial, that influence, while substantial, isn't necessarily unique in its methods.
Exactly. Other nations, powerful lobbies, they use similar tactics. Big budgets, focused campaigns, shaping narratives. It's part of the modern political playbook.
And we absolutely have to reinforce. Claims of world control are just, not based in evidence. They're exaggerated, often rooted in anti-Semitic tropes, and the sources we looked at clearly debunk them.
Absolutely a critical point.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener. The real power here isn't just understanding Israel's influence specifically.
What do you mean?
It's realizing that all complex geopolitical stories demand evidence, demand critical thinking, don't just run with assumptions or one side of the story.
Right. Consider how any nation, big or small, tries to navigate the world stage and shape outcomes.
The aha moment, maybe, is recognizing your own role. Be a discerning consumer of information. Question the narratives you hear. Look for diverse, verifiable sources. That applies way beyond just this one topic.
A call for critical thinking across the board. I like that.